I didn't start studying innovation as a nurse. I was doing my kind of regular job for a long time. And I think for me, and I still believe that this is true, that a lot of us, there are discussions that happen at levels and in places where we're not always invited. And I saw that. And I didn't quite know how to change that. And so for me, I saw that innovation both as a not just a kind of a cool, interesting thing, but as a process and a practice. It helped me both to be invited to the table, but also potentially to host those tables, and help to guide those discussions in new ways that wasn't possible before, or I didn't see as possible before. So it opened up a lot of doors for me, and let me put my efforts and skills into things and contribute and shape things that it was hard for me to get into before. And so I got really excited about figuring out how to actually build this as a part of, my vernacular, the muscles, the way I knew how to approach things, that it wasn't just a thought process. It was an actual thing that you could learn and apply and use and repeat and teach others.
I probably wouldn't have used these words when I found the nursing profession, but I would use them now. And that is that I selected the profession above all the other health professions because it was the most innovative, the most creative. And so I think nurses are by nature, by who we are, by what we bring to the healthcare system, innovators. The reason why I'm involved in teaching innovation is over time, education has a way of convincing us that only certain people are innovators, only certain people are creative. If you look at a group of children playing out on a playground, they can create games and stories and worlds with stones and sticks and pieces of grass. And slowly but surely, they're transformed over time through education to lose some of that. And some of them say, oh, I'm not creative. I don't have ideas. I couldn't change anything. And that's what I began to hear in nursing. I began to hear nurses say, I don't have those ideas. I'm just a nurse. And that began to trouble me deeply because I think the solutions to our greatest problems are going to be nursing led. So that's why I'm involved in reawakening innovation in nurses. I wouldn't say teaching innovation because I think it's there. It's about fanning the flame of that little spark that was always part of who they are. And I'm meeting amazing people who come to my door, like the old movie, The Field of Dreams. If you build it, they'll come. And that's what I experience is people want to learn how to use their skills, their gifts, their abilities to transform systems. And that's what nursing can do.
First of all, I love what Teddy had to say and her references to sandboxes and the importance of play. And also this sense that, that Teddy chose nursing as her tool to affect change in the world. And I think that she saw not only was it inherently creative, but it was also a profession that kind of offered such a range of pathways for creating better care, innovations in care. I think from a foundation perspective, we see nurses as the great untapped resource in healthcare. I don't think anybody's better positioned to understand this essential nexus of the healthcare system and the needs of everyday people. Nurses have all the insight and all the knowledge to be leaders in innovation, but they're also hindered not only by a longstanding medical culture that has marginalized their potential, but often by a tendency to downplay their own abilities as designers and leaders of change. And so it kind of amazes me that there aren't more foundations who are focusing on this area. But I think that we see a lot of value in elevating nursing's role in articulating the leading edge of where healthcare is headed. And I think to refer to one of Christy's comments, making that transition from an invitation to the table to hosting the table is critical. So we want to play a supportive role in all of that.
Christy, what have you observed across the industry and the market in terms of the assimilation of nurses and the kinds of activities that are going on? And how have your innovation skills supported you and helped you in your role? It sounds like you've done so many things in so many different organizations.
I definitely see it changing, but I'm not going to lie, there's a very long way to go. I think, healthcare has become a sexier industry than I would say that it was sort of viewed maybe, 10, 15 years ago. And the reason I even say that is, people have started to understand all the facets and the dynamic nature of healthcare that I think they didn't see before. And so I think that's important. I think how your industry is, how people that, are intrigued by it, want to be a part of it, want to help make it better, that it's not just healthcare people doing their healthcare thing. I think, problems aren't solved within just the system itself. People want to be able to be invited in. They want to be able to help to contribute. And so I think that's important. From, I think, the nursing standpoint, it is shifting. You're seeing more people bring nurses in, but I would say the default still is more on the physician side if you're wanting a voice. And so I think, and I say that not as, an apology or that's just the way that it is. I say it as kind of a call to action, I think, in that the more that we use our voice as nurses and the more that we see ourselves in that role and not always not a behind the scenes role, and not you can be behind the scenes and also take front stage and things and lead things and have a voice and tout what it is that your profession does and what you can contribute to change. And I know that that's sometimes a scary thing. I mean, I remember my first time speaking at a conference. It was at Stanford. I remember it. I could put myself in that room today and speaking to this giant group of people. And I remember the first thing that came out of my mouth was, if you would have told me 15 years ago as a nurse from a small town in Oklahoma that I would be standing on stage speaking to you all today, I wouldn't have believed you. And I know that I'm not alone in that. I know that I'm not alone in thinking, well, I don't know, but is my opinion worth sharing? Does anyone want to hear it? And so I think the more that we build our confidence, the more that we assert ourselves in ways that nurses know how. You hear all of us saying that. There are wonderful contributions that we have, but we have to use our voice and provide that so that more and more people can see that. So I think that's a call to action that I would have in small and in big ways, whatever your sphere of influence is, contribute your thoughts, contribute your expertise, whether that's around, like climate, like, Teddy's talking about, or innovation methods, or, or how to get more vaccines out in the world, whatever it is, use your place in the world and your position of power, and slowly you'll build up more and more confidence to make that change. So that's, I think, something I'm very excited about, and, and would love to continue to be a part of that, of using our voice for really good change in the world.
Do you think that there is renewed interest in innovation in the industry in this post-COVID world, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I do. It's kind of goes back to what I said earlier. I think people now see that healthcare plays such a role in our lives. It's not just a place where, you pop off and if you're sick and get something fixed. It's pervasive around us. It's how we handle disasters. It's how we, prevent things from happening. It's, it's in so many facets of our lives. And a lot of times it's very invisible. And I think, there are a lot of things that occurred through the pandemic. I think one of the things that occurred through the pandemic is because it created this big global shared experience, for better, for worse, And there's no one that didn't have some kind of a hand in health or wellness or caring for someone. No one on the planet, everyone had some kind of role in that. And so I think people now globally see themselves in some way as a part of this health and wellness of all of us as human beings. So I think that that's a really fascinating takeaway, and how nurses can tap into and amplify that for the caregivers around the globe, I think is really exciting.
That's great. I don't know who said this once, but it stuck with me. And they said you really could have three stances in the world. You could shrink to fit, you could rise to conquer, or you could link to co-create.
Nice.
And I think that some of those things, particularly Teddy in nursing education, how has that tackled those three dimensions? Because I'm sure there are some education programs that want people to shrink to fit, and then there are other programs that want people to rise to conquer, and then you are teaching people how to link to co-create, right, with partnerships. So how is nursing education responding to the challenges?
Well, nursing education is as broad can be. So it's hard to make general statements. What I can say is that nursing is innovation. So if we are not teaching it as part of the basics of nursing, how you nurse, we are missing a grand opportunity. Similar to design thinking and partnership, and how do you work with people and communities to bring them to the highest level of health. If we are formulaic, if everything is really lockstep and drilling that sense of wonder and awe and creativity out of people, we're missing an option. So there's no doubt that we have to create safe and effective care, but that doesn't mean that we have to be boring or lack creativity. When we deeply engage in relationship-based care, the door swings open to innovative solutions. And so after years and years of being a home care nurse, I got to hear firsthand what the patients thought of their care in the hospital. They were telling me who wore gloves and who did not wear gloves, who washed their hands, who did not wash their hands, who said what and who did not say things. And what mattered most to them were not that people, checked the boxes and filled in all the reports the proper way. What mattered most to them is the personal connection, and that they were heard and somebody listened deeply. So we need to be teaching students to listen for the storyline that patients are telling you, not just data points, but the story of what they're telling you, because locked up in that story is all the information about their needs, their current condition, what their hopes and dreams are for recovery, what their home is like when they return, what their community is like or their families like. We have to be listening to the stories. And that's where we're able then to give individualized care. So it's really important that we teach students that is the ground. The relationship is the ground of everything that we do that matters to the patient.
Eddie, do you notice something different about the next generation of nurses coming through and the younger folks? I mean, I just retired in January. I have a 45-year career in nursing, and it's been a great career for me. I do sense that younger people are ready to transform it and say, this isn't working for me, and why don't we do this? And so do you see a pattern there in terms of next generation leaders, and how can we support next generation leaders to see themselves creative?
Oh, absolutely, Dan. I love the people that are coming up, the next generations. As much as the situations we face are dire, and they are dire, the people coming up, the generations following us, are brilliant, compassionate, wonderful change agents. And what they come to us for is not a knowledge dump. They don't want us to just dump everything in them. They can look that up on the internet. The internet has really changed things.
In their pocket.
Whatever they want to know, they can find it out. They can be sitting in, the audience you're speaking to And they might say, oh, did you read the JAMA report or the Lancet that just came out this morning? It's like, well, no, I didn't, but you can tell me what the latest best practice is. So they're very, very savvy on knowledge acquisition. What we need to be doing is giving them knowledge and skills to transform the systems. How do systems work? How do you lead change? Changes doesn't happen overnight. It's extremely strategic, and there's certain things that you need to do. How do you develop relationships, effective networks? Students also expect us to, quite frankly, prepare them to practice in a world changed by climate change. And if you don't think that's the case, ask them if they feel they know that this is going to happen, and they'll say, yes, they do. They're living through it right now, and they want to know how to practice safely in that world. They want us to be able to prepare them to be flexible, to nurse wherever nurses are needed. So not just in one setting, one area, one region, but to be ready and roll up their sleeves wherever nurses are needed. They want us to consistently promote and insist on diversity, inclusivity, equity, and justice. That's a message over and over again. If they don't hear it from us, we've lost our platform to teach. And perhaps above all else, the generation coming in wants us to, is asking us for hope. And is there time? Is there reason to hope? Can we change the systems that aren't working? And they need to hear us say, yes, it's absolutely possible, but come along with me and let's co-create it together.
I did just see somebody pop a comment in the chat about seasoned nurses, not to appreciate their contributions as well. And I think that they have a role to play in terms of mentoring and sharing their wisdom and experience with the next generation.
Absolutely. And quite frankly, sometimes the way things were done is the way that we'll return to that's most effective as we move forward. So you need all generations in this mix, all people working together to come up with the solutions we need.
Experience matters. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Erin, from your perspective, in terms of your work with nurses around the country, are there certain trends or things that are standing out for you in terms of what things that you're witnessing in terms of the changes and the transformation?
Yeah, no, it's been a really interesting, it's been an interesting year. And again, witness is such a relative term because we're seeing everything through this limited window of Zoom. But I think that there have been a few ideas that have emerged that I'm thinking deeply about. I just finished in the last week or so reading, I'd say close to 300 proposals from around the country for various programs that we administer, including an RFP this year that focuses on racism and health. And I think that the theme that has emerged from those 300 applications that I find most compelling is a theme of trust, about how do we build trust better, and how do health systems establish trustworthiness more effectively. And I think that when nurses, of course, are the perennial most trusted profession, but it's always thought of as a kind of soft skill. And I think that there's this really important opportunity to think about trust as an area worthy of innovation and an area that is critical if we are to advance any agenda that aligns with health equity. And so I'm thinking a lot about this idea of trust innovations in trust and trustworthiness, and thinking of that this sort of remarkable asset of nursing is something that deserves to be leveraged more deeply. I would say the second observation this year has been that there is a lot of really powerful work that nurses have done that benefits populations who have historically been discriminated against. But there isn't a lot of mature work that deals with racism explicitly, particularly in its structural aspects. So I think that there is a lot of space for nurses to not only be attentive to the needs of populations who have been impacted historically by racism, but to address racism overtly. So I think those are two areas that I'm thinking a lot about, and I'm hoping that we can develop perhaps some additional programming to support further exploration in nursing in those areas.
I wonder if you could say, Aaron, a little bit about your program and how people might apply for a grant. You said you just reviewed 300. People may not be aware of what where to go or how to do it, and
Sure.
maybe not. The deadline might have passed now, but how could people access information about the Hillman Foundation and use that into the future?
Sure, I'll try to make this brief, but our website, www.rahf.org, is a good resource. It's an old website. We're in the midst of trying to build something new. So I don't think it's a good representation of who we are and what we do, but you'll find useful information there. And what we've done essentially is to develop a pipeline of programs that support nursing-driven innovative work along a continuum of innovation. So we support work from pre-evidence stage nascent work where it's really just about a good idea, to work that is positioned for national replicability. And so we don't accept unsolicited proposals, but I would encourage people to look on the website and maybe note that at the beginning of 2022, around February, we send out an announcement that our programs are open. And so they're all focused on nursing-driven innovation or nursing-driven initiatives that target the healthcare needs of historically marginalized populations.
That's great. I see Lois just put your website into the chat.
Thank you so much, Lois.
So
Thank you,
just
Lois.
check that out in terms of support for your efforts and ongoing. And if you've got an idea percolating, check out how it might be resourced and funded in that regard. So one of the things that I wrote my dissertation, one of the things came from somebody, I forget now his name, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. He said, imagination is the reconciliation of opposite or discordant qualities. And what I learned in my work with creativity is oftentimes you have a problem and you have an outcome and you have to think about those things in the same space, and it's complementary in nature, right? There's upsides and downsides about the outcome and the problem. But one of the things that I then started doing is I asked people, what is the opposite of nursing? Because if you're really going to understand nursing, you've really got to understand both sides of the coin, right? And the opposite, the complementary nature. And so I posed that question to the people in the group, and people generally struggle with that. Someone just said opposite of nursing equal loan shark in the chat, but personal experience there. But if you look in Webster's dictionary, the opposite of nursing is negligence. And so every day in every way, people are managing the tensions between nursing and negligence, in my mind. So the next part of the discussion is, what happens if nurses don't innovate, right? What happens if we maintain the status quo? And how do we help nurses manage these competing values and competing commitments? You've got people that want to create, people that want to compete, people that want to control, people that want to collaborate. You've got all kinds of competing things. You've got organizational, people that want to focus and get real detailed. You've got clumpers and splitters. And how do you manage the different worldviews that are out there. And in your mind, what's the challenge? What are the opposites of innovation, and how might they influence the way you think and what you do? So Christy, Teddy, Aaron, anyone can respond to that one.
I can jump in a little bit. I think if nurses don't innovate, I think what's scary, though there's a lot of things that scare me about that, but I think the thing that scares me the most is nurses have such a vital role and understanding and lens into the world that other professions don't have. And not that the other professions aren't important, they are. And, the way we work as an interdisciplinary team is very important. But, nurses have a specific way of looking at the world, and it addresses whole person care. It addresses the context in which people, live, work, and play. And that's really important for the way we're talking about going forward, because people are not their disease. People are interconnected with the system that they're a part of. And so I think that that's so important. And then you layer that on top of, being the mass of the profession that we are. And if that isn't heard, then I can't imagine that the changes that would be created would be as good as they could have been. And nurses have a really powerful way of bringing not just their voice to the table, but also the voice of the people that they care for, that they care about, that they serve, that they partner with. And we're not going to do these things in the future with just healthcare professionals, creating something that works for healthcare professionals. That's not a sustainable system that anybody wants. And so I think nurses, for all of those reasons, it's vital that nurses play a role in innovating for the future.
Can I add to that? That was so well said. I just, when nurses innovate, everyone benefits.
Yeah.
When nurses don't innovate, what I guess comes to my mind is just a sense that the populations that, for instance, our foundation is most focused on, populations that have been significantly marginalized, they're the ones who really lose out. There's this broader layer that you're speaking to, where nurses have been not only patient advocates, but they've been a voice for the voiceless from the very beginning. Wow. And the moment that activism and advocacy is lost, then it's really difficult to get that back. So, from my perspective, it's less of an issue about how this impacts the nursing profession. It's about how it impacts groups and communities and families. So I think it's critical that we have to ensure that the system doesn't become negligent by making sure that nurses are part of that leadership in these conversations about where we go next.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take it even one step further. We're all just building on a here.
I've got a build waiting too. So
and say if nurses don't innovate, the healthcare system won't be effective. The deepest needs of patients and families and communities will go unmet. And if we fail to innovate, if we fail for nurses to rise to their full potential, it becomes a national security issue where the future of the nation is at risk. And I say that in all seriousness, in that if our children are not delivered safely, if they are not fed and are not healthy, this is our nation's future. If women have adverse effects related to labor and delivery, and there's huge disparities in that area, it threatens our national security. So this is an issue that we should all deeply, deeply care about. And it's not icing on the cake, and wouldn't it be nice if we had time to innovate? It is really how we move forward.
Yeah.
There's an interesting question in the chat about, and I'll pose it to the group. Do you all feel like the nursing profession is one of the only professions that continually has to defend and prove our worth? What are some strategies to turn that challenge around?
You know, something that's funny about that. So I've spent the last 17 years of my career just as anchored in nursing as I have in design thinking and human-centered design practitioner space. And that's the same conversation that design thinking and human-centered design practitioners have is, why do we have to continuously justify our value, and how come design isn't represented at the C-suite? So it is, we're not the only profession having that kind of conversation. What comes up in that profession as an example is show it, keep telling the stories of success and impact. Don't just talk about, well, why aren't we? Tell the stories, amplify those stories that say, what have we done? What do we still think is possible? Because people have to rewrite scripts. Like, we have to rewrite scripts, as I was mentioning earlier. I had to rewrite scripts in my own head about who I was, what my potential contribution was, what the limitations were or weren't. Because most of those I placed on myself. Nobody else really placed those on me. I placed most of those on myself. And so I think we have to rewrite that, and not just in ourselves, but in the people around us. And you start telling those stories, you start sharing those stories. I think that's why also organizations like ANA are so important. ANA is working to, rewrite those scripts that we sometimes don't even know are there within ourselves as a profession, within others as they look at the profession. That story is ours to tell. So we have to keep telling it.
Yeah, that's so important. I once had a discussion with a physician that I knew quite well. And I said, he said, nurses have saved my butt many times. And I said, well, that's great. What do we do? And he could not tell us what we do. He really didn't know. And that's something that falls back onto us, is, as you say, is to tell the story. What do we do? And to be able to value it, and not be diminish our work, and not feel that it's less important. It is critically important. If nurses are missing, the patient is missing.
Yeah.
Erin, do you have any observations from the outside in terms of this question about worth? And
no, I think I think what I worry about is we go through these cycles where, not that long ago, New Yorkers were shouting out their windows at 7 p.m. every night to thank nurses, that there was this sort of, nurses were vaunted to this sort of level of heroes. But that's so short-lived. I don't have faith that there's that appreciation will be long-lived. And I think that just says an enormous amount about, I think, the challenges that nursing faces, where, this most trusted profession thing is great, but in some ways that image is grounded in some two-dimensional kind of caricatures of who nurses are. So we need to sort of add dimension to a broader appreciation for who nurses are and what they're capable of. The kind of idea of a Florence Nightingale-like bedside nurse still is alive and well in the minds of average Americans and executives in the C-suite. So I think that we just need to try to tackle that. But culture change is, that's the big challenge. That's what I think about. That's what maybe keeps me up at night.
Keeps you up at night, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of discussion, and I think some of the ANA surveys about burnout and how nurses have really sort of, really struggled with keeping up and managing things. And so I think the opposite of burnout is revitalization. And so how do you, and I also, there was a period of time in the last year, I think I was suffering from innovation burnout or innovation overload. And so do you have practice principles that kind of help you manage your vitality and your innovative spirit and work against the draw of burnout? What is the energy management strategy and secret sauce for maintaining an innovative spirit?
I'm just going to, jump in here, because as the non-nurse, I can't compete here because I don't work as hard as any nurse. And so in terms of what I need to do to sort of remain vital, I can't compete. What I can say is I think that essential to cultivating a creativity and an openness to be changed by what you encounter, and an openness to new ideas. It requires a practice of being off balance and embracing imbalance. And I think oftentimes that can take the form of getting out of what you know. I think the best advice that I ever heard offered to a group of nurses came from a couple of MIT researchers who just said, get out of nursing. And they didn't mean get out of the profession. They just meant explore something else. Approach a problem as an artist might approach that problem. Delve into other professions, think playfully. And I think that can be a really profound practice if you have the time to incorporate it. And again, I think that's a big challenge for nurses, is how do you find the time to give to yourself something that constitutes a new practice, a new mindset.
Kind of pulling off that, and Aaron, you're so thoughtful in all of your answers. I was actually chatting in the chat, and I can't scroll fast enough to remember the person's name, but you know who you are. They were asking about, when I trying to do things, I get stuck in the bureaucracy and the red tape and et cetera. And I was kind of throwing in some things about, call out, the people who can help to be your advocates, and actually talk to them about being your advocates. Find your partner in crime, and partner with them. And they were asking questions about, like, what does a partner in crime mean? And so this to me is in the same vein of this area of burnout. I remember probably 3 years into trying to lead the innovation effort at Kaiser. Now, granted, we had 220,000 employees, and it was a big system to try to change and move. And we were on the road all the time, going from region to region. And we had a fairly small team at the time. And I remember putting together this business case to try to figure out how to have more resources, and was just exhausted. And we called it the dark case. And I literally, like, the cover, it was black. I mean, it was so, I can go back and think, like, I was at a really difficult time at that point. And I mean, I was like screaming burnout. And I remember the person I worked for at the time, her name is Marilyn Chow. Some of you all might know her. And I remember she said, you might need to lighten this up just a little bit before we go somewhere, but point taken. And I started kind of processing, like, what is keeping me? That kind of fast forwards to Dan, when you were talking about the work that I focused in on when I started working on my dissertation. One of the things that came from it was what I call the microclimates for innovation. And I studied intentionally areas outside of healthcare, because, kind of, Aaron, to your point, I wanted to get my head out of just healthcare to see, like, how do places that start to change the way that they approach innovation, the people that are doing it from a people lens, not a structure, not like people lens. What do they do? And I could go through many different things, but the one I want to call out specifically is they have partners in crime. And by that, I don't mean they partner across disciplines. I mean somebody that when you have a shitty day and you just think, I'm done with this, you can sit with them and you can cry next to them. Or you do something great and you think, oh, I nailed this. You can celebrate with them. Like, having that kind of thing around you is so important. You know, innovation is not a solo sport. Making change is not a solo sport. And you know, yes, you need interdisciplinary teams to make changes. Yes, you have to have champions. Yes, all these different things. But man, if you don't have somebody that, you know, and it doesn't have necessarily be one person, but even if you have that one person, you get that, you've got to have that to keep your energy going, to keep refueling yourself, to check you when your tank starts running too low. There's a kid's book that I talk about all the time, is How Full Is Your Bucket?
Mhm.
And you know, we all have this, and you guys should check it out if you haven't been. Short cap of it is, we all have this invisible bucket that has water in it that floats above our heads, and when your bucket is low, you don't have anything to contribute to others. You're angry, you're depleted, you're upset. And when you're able to get things in your bucket, somebody says something nice, maybe you do a good deed for someone else, someone helps you out, and your bucket fills up, you also have more to contribute to other people in their bucket. And I think so many times we think, I just grind through this with my empty bucket because it's my duty. It doesn't work that way. So, that the partner in crime, and I just call it partner in crime because I think, you get to all kinds of mischief. You can talk about anything you want, that I think is so important. It's not theoretical. It's not complicated. It's, you feel it when you've got it, and you feel it when you're missing it. So that is, I think, one of the most simple human things that I would recommend for people.
Wow, that's great advice. Teddy.
Yeah, I want to respond to a comment Erin made about not sort of working as hard as nurses. And boy, if you're funding innovation and you're looking at new ways to transform systems, that's a heck of a lot of work. So I think we need to be really observing each other carefully. Back to the question of what happens when nurses aren't appreciated. And I want to say to the nurses, do we spend adequate time appreciating the nursing assistants? Do we see the work of the lab professionals? Do we appreciate the people that deliver the meal tray? Do we honor the people who drive the transportation vehicles? Because that's about really seeing everyone. You talked about the importance of getting out of your discipline, and we talk a lot about transdisciplinarity, of learning from other disciplines, asking lots and lots of questions. I happen to be somebody who defines health is everything. There isn't anything that's not related to health. So that means I need to go everywhere. I'll be asking about rocks and flowers and stones and the air and transportation and farming, and what's the lived experience of new immigrant or new Americans. What's the experience of elders? What's the experience of children? And just asking lots and lots and lots of questions, because the more answers I have, the more stories I've heard, the more options I have to pull those together into meaningful, innovative solutions. So I love to learn. I find that that's one thing that keeps my passion alive, is to learn. Always ask questions, read as many books as I can. And the further they are away from traditional healthcare or traditional nursing, I almost learn more about nursing than if I went that way. I also am really careful to understand what's mine to do and what I can refer to other people. So I'm very clear about where sort of parameters on what's my job and what's my work in the world. And if something comes my way and there isn't alignment with that, then I'll say, you know what, I can't do it for you, but I know just the person who can. So I maintain a really broad network of people that I can send things on to. I really recognize that rest and renewal are part of innovation. And I've learned my own self sort of signals well enough to know that when I'm tipping into dis-ease, because I need to pull back and rest and renew. So I don't see that I'm taking time from innovation or care. I am actually improving my odds at being more effective. And I'm also learning how to prune. That's my new word. And it's not just because my skin is getting old and wrinkly. It's it's that there are times in our life where something was very, very important, but it may no longer be necessary. And so I've learned to prune it and take it off so that I have energy to really direct to the task at hand. And finally, I've just learned to aim for excellence and not perfection. I can always do my best and be excellent, but I am never perfect. Yeah.
That's great. This conversation reminds people who know me know I'm a fan of something called liberating structures. Maybe Lois could put that www.liberatingstructures.com in the chat. But there's a couple of liberating structures which I really like, and one is called 15% Solution, and it comes from the work of an organizational guy, and he talks about the reality is that those of us in large complex organizations can't control up to 85% of what goes on in the organization. It's just not possible. But you can control 15%. And so it's always useful to figure out what your 15% solution is here that you can control, that you can make a difference in, that's within your sphere of influence and leadership. And so that is also another way that I think people can make decisions along the way in terms of their energy management and their time.
You know, Dan, Keith and myself and several others literally just last week posted a really long blog post, open article about liberating structures. I wrote about liberating structures in human-centered design. A lot of folks contributed. It might be something interesting to, if I can find it.
I saw that on LinkedIn. I loved it. It was great.
If I find it fast enough, I'll share it if people are interested.
All about the principles.
Exactly.
Unleash everybody's creativity. Everybody participates. Start with purpose. Be clear about your purpose, and it's a great. Just Google liberating structures, and people will find all kinds of great ways to advance their innovation and engage people in a different kind of conversation. What are your hopes for the nursing profession? Why nursing? Why now in terms of innovation, in terms of where we're going here? And given your experiences through time and my interest in the future, I have a famous quote I heard from the Tarlos. They said, what the future holds for you depends on what you hold for the future. And so as each individual makes their own choices and decisions about the future, that particular future will unfold. But what are our panelists' hopes for the future and the nursing profession writ large? I don't know, who wants to go first?
I'll jump in. I think, again, as a non-nurse, but somebody who's I feel like I'm a student of nursing, a lifelong student. Nurses have always been such powerful advocates and activists on behalf of others. But I think it's going to be essential moving forward that nurses advocate just as strongly, just as emphatically for themselves, particularly as innovators and leaders of change. I think that when nurses are bold, when nurses are, when their voices are heard, again, going back to something I said earlier, everyone benefits. So my hope is that there is some kind of tectonic shift in the culture of healthcare that will allow the voice of nursing to lead. I hope that there will be some pruning within the status quo that will allow new growth to take place. I just think that, again, nurses are ready to innovate in a number of areas, but the structures aren't quite in place yet. And I think that there's a culture that's not willing to make that space. So my hope is that space is created.
Great.
I think I think for me, it's in a lot of different facets. I hope for nursing for me, one is on that front end of what people think of being a nurse is, and that creates a draw into the profession that's expanded and is exciting, and it attracts people who are caring, which I think we've done a great job of. It also attracts rebels who are excited about pushing in new bounds, and that they feel like when they get there that they have a place, that they're not always swimming upstream. I think that's one hope that I have for nursing. I'm also excited about things like, when Teddy talks about, the programs and what are we pulling into nursing programs, that just becomes like, that's how we teach people. That's the kind of stuff that we teach them, that it doesn't take a going down a completely different path and taking, a different program and saying, we teach people this, and it's so different that, that the kinds of things that, Teddy and her colleagues teach, that becomes pervasive. And and people know how to teach those things. People expect it. I think we all will get better. And I would say also the places that nurses go to work, that we invest in nurses, not just their clinical skills, but the spaces and the ways that we allow time and energy and capacity building to help lead and create change, because it makes such a difference when that's not just something that you always have to do on your own spare time. When there's structures around you that help to support you, whether it's in your community or, in the organization that you work in, but that those things are there. I think right now, a lot of it is just, it's done by the courageous and plowing through, and, we all get, kind of, it's that muck in the mire, and we're like, but we're going to do it. And I would love to see a day when it doesn't require that of people. Not that we can't do that, but that's not a sustainable way to do it. That things are put in place to support that change, to make it sustainable for the nurses that are attempting to do it, and it can be amplified. So those are some of the things that I have for the hopes and dreams for nurses in the future.
That's great. Teddy.
Yeah, I really want to see the day when I never hear a nurse say, I'm just the nurse. I want a nurse to say, I'm the nurse, I'm here.
The nurses are here.
I am ready. When I think of patients over the years that have said, I was informed by my physician that there's nothing more that can be done. And nurses have always entered and said, oh, yes, we can. We will work to make you comfortable. We will work with your family to bring you home. We will ensure that you're able to meet with your children and your grandchildren. There's always more that nurses can do. And so even though we're in very, very difficult situation in so many ways, I want the nurses to step up and say, I am here, we are here, so that my vision for the future would be able to say to my grandkids someday, let me tell you about a time when it seems so difficult to believe it was possible, but there were actually people that didn't have health care. And nurses and my friends, we worked to change that. And there was a time when people were treated differently because of the way they looked or the language they spoke or the country they were born in, and nurses worked to change that. Let me tell you about a time, and it's so hard to believe, that we didn't honor the water and the air, and we dumped plastics in it, we put pollutants in it, and nurses came together and solved that. So now the water is clean and the air is fresh to breathe. It's hard to believe it, but we work together to make this possible.
I would just weigh in just a little bit to say that the PhD students that I encounter most often, they feel like they're just as much activists as they are doctoral candidates. And they're not interested in these distinctions which sometimes feel really false between the clinical side of the profession and the research side of the profession. I think what interests them is harnessing the power of science to affect change on a population level. So there's nurses just as much as bedside nurses are, but they're using a different set of skills, a different mindset in order to affect change. And so I think that all of the conversations around innovation are just as relevant for PhD students, for DNP students, for nurse practitioners, the entire spectrum of nursing. And I think that that's what's exciting. And I hope that there's greater collaboration and increased blurring of divisions. And let's dispense with conversations about who's a real nurse, you know, which I hear altogether too often. Yeah, so.
And I love that you mentioned collaboration, because that's what we need to do, is to develop these partnerships where researchers come up with new knowledge, ask innovative questions, not just study innovation, but ask really creative innovation questions that haven't been asked before, generate new knowledge, which then is applied by people out in clinical work. The people in the clinical work say, we're seeing this trend, experiencing this situation. We need some knowledge or some information on how to solve this. That goes back to the researchers to figure out. So there's this seamless interplay with each other, not one above the other, not a wall, not a firewall between the two, but absolute interplay of these skill sets. Then we've hit the sweet spot.
I have a couple really tangible things to add on to that also. So you mentioned co-design. I think co-design is a really ripe topic area to focus on if you're a nurse looking at research areas. How does it happen? Why does it not happen? What does it mean? How does it look in different places? And bringing some of the real stories to life. You know, dropping down into the situations, which I think is what's exciting about nursing, is you can amplify those actual stories and look at the cases and take it from that standpoint. I would also say, kind of as a side part of that, prototyping of bringing ideas into reality of whatever fidelity level that is. I mean, I know these are very specific things, but I know from my own research, there are a lot of gaps in these spaces of how does prototyping happen? What does it look like? What does it mean? How do you have the skills to do it? What are the perceived risks around it? Because things tend to get caught in an idea space, and there's a big gap going from that idea space into actually making things into reality. So I think that that's another big one. And then I would also say, you know, if you're interested as a nurse studying other nurses, I think workforce capacity of doing this, practicing it, you know, barriers to, you know, what it looks like at its best, what holds it back, you know, that kind of thing. I think those are all interesting, really concrete spaces that people can take that research and apply it and build on it.
And which mindsets hold us back? I think about, I bring students to Iceland, and in their hospitals, our OR students or surgical students, students that are already OR nurses, are just amazed that their surgical suites in Iceland have windows. There's not a window in our surgical suites in the United States. But why? I mean, why are we frozen in one way of thinking? So asking that question of what are the thought processes that are holding us back? Where are there some rigid untruths that we have assumed are necessary, which just aren't? They're old ways of doing things. We're just replicating the same old pattern. And what do we need to move beyond?
Teddy, I want to refer to a conversation we had yesterday, because I think one of the big issues is nurses oftentimes protect and defend the inside out of nursing, but they also need to appreciate the outside in of nursing. Can you tell your inside out, outside in Cuba story?
Sure. Another place I bring students is Cuba. They have the most spectacular healthcare system I've ever seen. And I don't believe that it's easy for people to build something if they don't think it's possible or they've never seen an alternative model in action. So I bring students to Cuba, and we were at a diabetic foot clinic, and the nurse was asking the patient about their diet and about their blood sugar levels. And then she asked about their shoes and how far do you have to walk and what type of shoes do you wear? And I was amazed at how quickly she just rolled into that questioning process. And I said, wow, that was really amazing that you went from blood sugars to shoes so effortlessly. And she goes, inside out. And I said, what do you mean by inside out? And she looked at me like, how could you be a nurse and not understand this? And that they see the whole thing integrated from a patient's blood gases, all the internal workings through their skin to where they live, the community they're in. It's all one seamless consideration. And so nurses nurse that whole inside outside philosophy or context ecosystem, basically. And I thought, wow, we could solve so many things if we saw people in their totality, if we really, really considered the whole picture. So, yeah.
And there's inside out in terms of innovation too. Nursing, doing innovation from the inside, but also appreciating how things from the outside influence us. So, well, I'm looking at the time here. We have about 8 minutes, but I want to get some reaction from folks, maybe a couple of questions and answers in the Q&A. Based on today's discussion, are you going to do anything different as a clinician? What might you start doing? What might you stop doing? What will you continue to do in terms of your innovation work? I just noticed in the chat here, there's a lot of discussion. Several people have gotten credentialed and have educational degrees from some of the places we mentioned, Ohio, and have masters in innovation, and that's great. What did you appreciate about today's discussion, and how did it influence your thinking? And what, if any, commitment to action will you make personally in terms of your own innovation journey?